Welcome back everybody. In this video we're going to be looking at how you can make a Zelda style attack system in GB Studio 3. It's obviously had some updates since GB Studio 2, so I'm hopefully going to be here to walk you through some of the changes and some of the ways that some of the bugs you might encounter and how to fix them. If you don't remember what GB Studio is, it's a game engine that lets you create Game Boy games and also lets you export for Analog Pocket. You can obviously play them in browser, or you can actually play them on your Game Boy. So you see here, I'm in GB Studio 3. I've put it into dark mode for you. And if you see here, we've got a button. When I press B, it sets our animation state to having a sword, and I'll show you how to set that up in a minute. And then it launches a projectile. This is the new way of item attack from GB Studio 2, and I'll explain these settings in a little bit. It then waits 0.1 seconds, which is the same lifetime as the launch projectile, and then it sets the animation state back to the default. So basically, what I'm just trying to say is that when we press B, it looks like we have a sword, and then we actually do the thing that does the attack, that the game engine actually attacks with, and then it waits 0.1 seconds so you can see that you have a sword, and then it sets it back to normal. So if we have a look in the sprites, I can explain why I've got some of this stuff going on, okay? So first of all, obviously this is how the new sprite editor works. If you remember my video on the sprite editor, I've made a little Zelda character, and so we got the idols, and then we've got the moving, which you can see here has the animations for. And then we have another state down here. So I've created an extra state. All I've done is added a simple sword. And you see, because this sword also attacks downwards, I've had to put the player character into the center of the sprite sheet. And because of that, we see here we've got the collision box up here. So thinking about that, we also have an invisible sprite that we're using as the attack. So if you have a look, the collision box is 16 by 16, and there's no artwork on it, so that it's completely invisible and it just has a collision box. If you can see, it's 16 by 16 pixels, and if we go back to the Zelda, it's actually 48 by 48, and obviously the collision box is 16 pixels up, right? So let's go back to the game world. So I'll now explain these settings in the launch projectile. So the sprite sheet is obviously invisible. In GB Studio 2, we might have used, for example, a sword, but because of the way that the launch projectile works, I'm having to put the sword into the state of into the sprite sheet of the player. So I'm using an invisible sprite sheet to act as the actual hitbox that hits the intended target, right? So it's invisible, but it is there because it has a collision box. The animation state, I think this is a bug showing these stuff because obviously it only has one state and that's default. The source will always be the player if we're obviously trying to put it on a button and we're trying to attack. So the player, and then the offset, obviously 0 offset because I think the idea is it comes from the center bottom, right? So 0, 0 would be the center bottom, and we don't want it to be the center bottom. We want it to be the actual center. And if you remember, we moved the collision box up by 16 pixels, so we've also moved this up by 16 pixels. And that's just so it comes from the same place as we'd expect it to, right? And obviously you have to click here, actor direction, and then choose the player, because we want it to go in the direction that the player is facing. So the directional offset here, you'd think should be 0 or something, but I've set it to 12. In my testing, I found that when the projectile overlaps with the player too much, it actually doesn't interact with the intended actor. So if I was going to come up to this actor here, and the offset was too little, then it wouldn't actually interact with the actor, because I think that the projectile is actually interacting with the player, even though it says here that it shouldn't be, right? So I've set it to 12. I've tried to get it as little as possible, but also enough to, go beyond the player. So I've set it to 12. Obviously, if you have a different size player and collision box, then you might have to change that. But keep in mind that if you're testing and you aren't able to interact with the the actors, I'll tell you how to actually show whether or not you're interacting with the actors in a minute. Then you might want to go back to this direction offset and think about how it works. Another thing that might be going wrong is the speed. So the player speed currently is at 1, so I've set the speed of the projectile to 2, and this is so that they don't interact. I don't want the projectile and the player to be interacting, so I'm making sure that the direction offset is making it as far away as possible within reason, and that the speed is going faster than the player so the player doesn't interact with it. And the animation speed is obviously none because it's actually just an invisible sprite sheet. The lifetime is 0.1. Obviously, because of the speed being 2, with the lifetime at 0.1, it can get, maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3 tiles away. But if in 0.2, I've just doubled that, so that's like 6 tiles away. And obviously, that would be the range of the attack, basically. And obviously, if we were to shrink the collision box of the invisible sprite sheet, then maybe it would, go less. But you need to keep that in mind when you're, setting the lifetime. And the collision group, this is the default. But when you think about it, you need to remember to set up your actors and anything that you want the attack to collide with to match these things, right? So obviously we can click multiple of them. So you don't want to be triggering things you want to be triggering. So make sure for example, I've got all the people on group 1, and then I've set the collision group to 3. So if we go to this person here, we've set the collision group to 1, and on group 3, hit. When it's hit by group 3, it then hides itself, it waits, and then it shows itself, and then waits, and then hides itself, and waits, and then shows itself. So it flashes, basically. Every 0.2 seconds, it changes whether it's hidden or showed. And this is how you make sure that you are actually interacting with the... Yeah, if I do this, you can see it just hides and shows, hides and shows. And obviously, you can do it multiple times. So if I do that, then the flash may be faster than you would want it to be. So you have to keep in mind, you may want to do a check. I've done other videos where we do a check beforehand so that it doesn't do it multiple times at once. So if we go back to the button, the reason why I have this 0.1 second wait time after the launch projectile is because without it, the player basically is set to having the sword and then is instantly set back to the default. And so there is no time for the player to see there be a change in the sprite sheet. And hopefully that has given you a good understanding of how I got something to look like this. Obviously, the actual sprite animation will probably want to be updated, to actually look like it's being lunged, or maybe an actual animation that plays that like swings a sword. But you'd obviously have to set up the attack to be to the right and then to the side if we're going to swing the sword around. But that stuff is definitely possible, and I would love to make a video on that in the future. You may be asking, how can I move diagonally? And that's by simply changing the scene type to adventure. Adventure lets you move diagonally. Just remember in the settings to change the default player sprite to the sprite that you're using as the main player. Obviously, this is top-down 2D and adventure, both use the same one. Yeah, so I hope that was helpful, guys. Obviously, remember that the states of the sprites are very useful, especially seeming as though we can use invisible projectiles. It should mean that we can get some pretty cool animations going and secret stuff happening under the hood that we couldn't do before. And I hope I've explained the reason why I've got these directional offsets and the speed the way they are. But yeah, I'd be happy to answer any questions in the comments below. Yeah, I'll put my patrons up on screen right now. Thank you so much to you guys. Remember to like the video if you like the video, subscribe if you haven't already. If you have any questions, please let me know, and let me know what you thought of this video and what you'd like to see next. If you found this useful, I'd be very happy to hear, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.